Imagine this. You come home after a long day. Your child runs toward you, full of energy, full of ideas. They start playing, talking, moving from one thing to the next. It's like their mind is constantly exploring. And for a moment, it's actually beautiful to watch. But then something small happens. You say it's time for dinner, or you turn off a toy. And everything shifts. Frustration rises quickly. Tears come suddenly. And within seconds, it feels like the situation is completely out of control. And maybe later, when things are quiet again, you find yourself wondering, is this just a strong-willed, energetic child? Or is there something deeper going on that I don't fully understand yet? Before we go any further, it's really important to say this. This video is not a diagnosis. Many of the behaviors we're going to talk about are completely normal in young children. Every child struggles with transition sometimes. Every child gets overwhelmed. Every child has moments of impulsivity. But what neuroscience shows us is this. Sometimes there are consistent patterns in how a child's brain regulates attention, energy, and emotion. And when you begin to recognize those patterns early, something important changes. You stop reacting only to the behavior, and you start understanding the brain behind it. What ADHD actually is. ADHD is often misunderstood. It's not simply about having too much energy, and it's not about a child choosing not to listen. At its core, ADHD is about something much deeper. Self-regulation in the brain. That includes guiding attention, pausing before acting, managing emotional responses. These abilities are part of what scientists call executive functions, and they are largely supported by areas in the brain like the prefrontal cortex. The important thing to understand is this. In young children, these systems are still developing. So when we talk about early signs, we're not looking for problems. We're looking at how these systems are developing compared to what we would typically expect. What research shows. Researchers have followed children over many years to better understand how ADHD develops. And what they've found is fascinating. Certain differences often appear much earlier than expected, sometimes even in toddlerhood. Not as clear symptoms, but as patterns in everyday behavior. For example, differences in sleep patterns, differences in activity levels, and differences in how children respond to stimulation. These early patterns don't mean something is wrong, but they can act as early signals that a child's nervous system is working a little differently. Sign 1. Difficulty regulating activity. Let's start with one of the most visible patterns. Many children are active. That's completely normal. But some children have a much harder time regulating that activity. It's not just that they move a lot, it's that they seem unable to slow down. They keep going, even when they're clearly tired. They struggle to settle, even in calm situations. It can feel like their body is always on. Almost like the internal system that helps them shift from high energy to calm isn't fully available yet. And this is important. This isn't about willpower. It's about how the brain is managing energy and control. Sign 2. Transitions are unusually hard. Another pattern often shows up during transitions. Moving from one activity to another is a challenge for many children. But for some, these moments are consistently overwhelming. Going from playtime to dinner, leaving the park, getting ready for bed. These situations can trigger strong resistance or emotional reactions that seem disproportionate. From a brain perspective, this reflects difficulty switching between mental states. The brain has trouble letting go of one focus and smoothly adjusting to the next. Sign 3. Attention is intense, but hard to guide. A common belief is children with ADHD can't focus. But that's not entirely accurate. Many children actually show very strong attention, just not in a flexible or controlled way. They may become deeply absorbed in something interesting, almost completely tuned in. But then, suddenly, their attention shifts. It's not that attention is missing, it's that directing it is difficult. The brain struggles to decide, what should I focus on now, and for how long? Sign 4. Strong, fast emotional reactions. This is one many parents recognize immediately. Emotions come quickly, and they come with intensity. Frustration builds fast. Disappointment feels overwhelming. And calming down can take time. And it's important to understand this correctly. This is not about a child being too dramatic. Research shows that emotional regulation is processed differently in children with ADHD, which means the experience of the emotion itself is often stronger and harder to manage. Sign 5. Differences in sleep. One of the most overlooked early patterns is sleep. Children who later receive an ADHD diagnosis are more likely to experience difficulty falling asleep, restless sleep, shorter sleep duration. And this creates a cycle. Because sleep is essential for regulating attention, emotion, and impulse control. A tired brain has far less capacity to stay balanced throughout the day. The big picture. Here is the most important takeaway. No single sign means anything on its own. What matters is the pattern. When several of these traits appear together and remain consistent over time, that's when it becomes meaningful to look more closely. Real-life example. Imagine a child who struggles to fall asleep, finds transitions very difficult, reacts emotionally very strongly, and seems constantly on the go. Each of these could be explained individually, but together they begin to form a pattern. And here's the most important part. Recognizing these patterns early is not about labeling your child. It's about understanding their brain. Because when you understand how your child's brain works, you can support it in a way that actually helps. In the next video, we'll look at something that confuses many parents. The difference between early signs of ADHD and autism, because from the outside, they can sometimes look very similar. And if this video helped you, feel free to share it with someone who might need a little more clarity too. In the last video, we talked about early signs of ADHD in young children. And one thing became very clear. Many behaviors that worry parents are actually about how a child's brain is developing. But here's where it gets confusing. Some of these patterns can look very similar across different developmental paths. A child who struggles with transitions. A child who reacts strongly to small changes. A child who seems either deeply focused or completely overwhelmed. And that leads many parents to wonder, could this be something else? Could I be looking at the same behavior, but with a completely different underlying cause? Today, we're going to look at early signs of autism. Not to label, but to understand what different patterns in the brain can look like in the early years. And just like in the last video, this is important. This is not a diagnosis. Many of the behaviors we'll talk about can absolutely appear in typically developing children. A child might avoid eye contact one day and be very connected the next. A child might repeat a word simply because they enjoy the sound of it. All of that can be part of normal development. What matters is not one behavior on its own. What matters is the pattern. And especially, how often it shows up, how intense it feels, and whether it stays consistent over time. When you begin to see patterns instead of isolated moments, things start to make much more sense. Autism is a neurodevelopmental difference. That means the brain develops differently in how it processes the world, especially in areas like social interaction, communication, sensory input, and patterns or predictability. This is not about intelligence, and it's not about parenting. It's about how the brain organizes experience. Some brains are wired to focus more on people. Others are wired to focus more on patterns, details, or sensations. And these differences often begin to show early, not always in obvious ways, but in subtle, repeated patterns in everyday life. Researchers studying early childhood development have found that signs of autism can sometimes be observed as early as the first 2 years of life, not as clear symptoms, but as differences in how children engage socially, respond to their environment, and process what they see, hear, and feel. For example, studies have shown that some children who are later diagnosed with autism tend to show differences in things like how often they look at faces, how they respond to their name, or how they share attention with others. Again, these are not labels. They are patterns that, over time, can tell a story about how a child's brain is developing. Let's start with one of the most important areas, social connection. Most young children naturally seek connection. They look at you to share a moment. They point to show you something interesting. They check your reaction when something happens. It's like they are constantly asking, "Did you see that too?" This is called shared attention. But some children show this differently. They may make less eye contact, not point to share interest, or seem less focused on social interaction overall. And this can sometimes be misunderstood, because it doesn't mean they don't care. It means their brain may not automatically prioritize social information in the same way. They may be just as interested in the world, but their attention is drawn to different things. Another early pattern can appear in communication, and this goes beyond how many words a child uses. It's about how communication is used in interaction. For example, some children may use fewer gestures, like pointing, waving, or showing things. Others may not engage as much in back-and-forth exchanges. You say something, and instead of responding or building on it, the interaction stops. Some children may repeat words or phrases instead of creating new ones. This is sometimes called echolalia. And again, it's not random. It's often a way the brain processes and practices language. The key difference is in the function of communication, not just the quantity. Another pattern many parents notice is a strong need for predictability. All children benefit from routines, but some children rely on them much more deeply. Small changes can feel very big. A different cup, a new route home, a change in order. These moments can lead to distress that seems intense compared to the situation. From a brain perspective, predictability creates a sense of safety. If the world feels unpredictable, the brain has to work much harder to process what's happening. And that can quickly become overwhelming. You might also notice repeated behaviors or very focused interests. For example, a child lines up toys in a specific way, repeats the same movement again and again, or becomes deeply focused on one topic or object. From the outside, this can seem unusual, but from the inside, it often serves a purpose. It creates structure. It makes the world feel more organized and predictable. It gives the brain something stable to hold on to. So these behaviors are not meaningless. They are adaptive responses to how the brain experiences the world. One of the most important and often overlooked areas is sensory processing. Some children experience the world more intensely. Sounds may feel louder than expected. Lights may feel too bright. Certain textures may feel uncomfortable or even overwhelming. Other children may seek more input. They might spin, jump, crash into things, or constantly touch objects. This isn't random behavior. It's the nervous system trying to regulate itself. Research shows that sensory processing differences are a central part of autism, and they influence how a child reacts, behaves, and engages throughout the entire day. Just like in the ADHD video, the most important thing is this: no single sign means anything on its own. What matters is the pattern. When multiple differences appear together in social connection, communication, behavior, and sensory processing, and when they remain consistent over time, that's when it becomes meaningful to look more closely. Imagine a child who makes less eye contact, prefers playing alone most of the time, becomes very distressed with small changes, and reacts strongly to certain sounds or textures. Each of these could exist on its own, but together, they begin to form a pattern. And here's what matters most. These patterns are not problems to fix. They are differences to understand. Because when you understand how a child experiences the world, you can respond in a way that actually supports them. You reduce overwhelm, you increase safety, and you create an environment where that child can develop in their own way. In the next video, we're going to bring everything together. We'll look at the key differences between early signs of ADHD and autism. Because from the outside, they can sometimes look very similar. And if this video gave you clarity, you can share it with someone who might be asking the same questions too. In the last two videos, we looked at early signs of ADHD and early signs of autism in young children. And if you watched both, you might have noticed something surprising. Some of these patterns look almost identical. A child who struggles with transitions. A child who reacts strongly to small changes. A child who seems either constantly on or completely overwhelmed. And that leads to a very common question. How can you tell the difference? Today, we're going to look at that question. Not by listing symptoms, but by understanding the patterns behind the behavior. Because from the outside, things can look similar. But underneath, the brain is working in very different ways. Let's start with something many parents notice first. A child who seems constantly in motion. They run, climb, jump from one thing to the next. They have energy that feels almost endless. At first, this can look the same in both ADHD and autism. But if you look a little closer, you start to see a difference. In ADHD, the movement is often about seeking stimulation. The brain is looking for input, for novelty, for something engaging. The activity is flexible. It shifts quickly from one thing to another. In autism, movement can look similar, but often serves a different purpose. It can be more repetitive, more rhythmic, more focused on creating a sense of stability. So, on the surface, movement. But underneath, one brain is seeking stimulation. The other is creating structure. Now let's look at attention. A child with ADHD may seem unable to focus. They start something, then quickly move on. They get distracted easily. Their attention is pulled in many directions. But here's the key. Their attention is driven by interest. If something is exciting enough, they can focus deeply, sometimes for a long time. The challenge is controlling where attention goes. Now compare that to autism. Here, attention often looks different. Instead of constantly shifting, it can become very fixed. A child may focus intensely on one activity, one object, or one topic. And the difficulty is not starting attention, but shifting it away. So, again, from the outside, both children might not respond when you call them, but for completely different reasons. One is pulled away by something else. The other is deeply locked into what they're already doing. Let's talk about social connection. This is one of the most important differences, but also one of the most misunderstood. A child with ADHD often wants connection. They seek interaction. They look for engagement, but their impulsivity can get in the way. They interrupt. They miss social cues. They may act before thinking. So the connection is there, but it's harder to regulate. In autism, the pattern can be different. Some children may seek less social interaction or engage in ways that feel different. They may not naturally look to share experiences in the same way. It's not about not caring. It's about the brain not automatically prioritizing social information. So again, both children might struggle socially, but one struggles with regulation inside connection, the other with how connection is processed. Now, let's look at emotional reactions. Both ADHD and autism can involve strong emotions, meltdowns, frustration, overwhelm. And this is where many parents feel confused, because the reaction looks the same, but the cause is often different. In ADHD, emotional reactions are often linked to impulse control. The feeling comes quickly, and the brain struggles to slow it down. In autism, emotional reactions are often linked to overwhelm. Too much sensory input, too much unpredictability, too much change at once. So again, same behavior, different underlying process. Let's look at routines and change. A child with ADHD may resist transitions, but often because they are engaged in the current activity and don't want to stop. Their resistance is about shifting attention. In autism, routines often play a deeper role. Predictability creates safety. And when that predictability is disrupted, it can feel genuinely distressing. Not just inconvenient, but overwhelming. So the outside behavior might look the same. Resistance to change. But inside, one brain struggles to disengage, the other struggles with unpredictability. Now, let's bring in something we haven't fully connected yet: sensory processing. In ADHD, children often seek stimulation. They move, touch, explore. Their nervous system is looking for input. In autism, sensory processing is often more intense or more sensitive. Sounds may feel overwhelming. Textures may feel uncomfortable. Light may feel too bright. Or the child may actively seek specific types of input to regulate themselves. This sensory layer explains a lot of behavior that might otherwise seem confusing. So here's the big picture. ADHD is primarily about regulating attention, impulses, and activity. Autism is primarily about differences in social processing, sensory experience, and predictability. And that's why they can sometimes look similar on the surface, but feel very different once you understand the patterns. Let's bring this into one simple example. Imagine two children at a birthday party. Both become overwhelmed. Both start to cry. Both want to leave. From the outside, it looks identical. But one child is overwhelmed because there is too much happening at once. Too much noise. Too much input. The other child is overwhelmed because they can't regulate their excitement, their impulses, their emotions. Same situation. Different brain processes. And this is why understanding the why matters so much more than labeling the behavior. Because once you understand the underlying pattern, you respond differently. You don't just try to stop the behavior, you support the system behind it. Here's a very simple way to think about it. ADHD is often about, I can't control where my brain goes. Autism is often about, the world feels different to my brain. And just to make this very clear, here is a simple side-by-side summary. ADHD often looks like difficulty controlling attention, highly flexible but easily distracted focus, strong desire for interaction, and impulsive emotional reactions. Autism often looks like more fixed attention, differences in social engagement, a strong need for predictability, and sensory sensitivities. And the most important thing to remember is this: these are not labels to rush toward. They are ways of understanding patterns. Because when you understand how a child's brain works, You can meet them where they are. And that's what actually helps. In the next video, we're going to look at something very practical. What actually helps children with these patterns before any diagnosis is even part of the conversation? Because there are simple things that can make a huge difference in everyday life. And if this video helped you see things more clearly, you can share it with someone who might be asking the same questions right now. In the last videos, we talked about early signs of ADHD and autism, and how some of these patterns can look surprisingly similar. And for many parents, that creates a very natural question. What should I actually do now? Not in 5 years, not after a diagnosis, but today. Because when you start to see these patterns, you don't just want information. You want to help your child. Before we get into that, there's one important shift to make. You don't need to fix your child. You don't need to wait for a label. What helps most in early childhood is not correction. It's support. Support for how the brain regulates attention, emotion, and sensory input. And the good news is, there are a few simple things that make a very big difference. Let's start with the most important one: connection. Not just being around your child, but being with them. Moments where your attention is fully there. Short, simple interactions where you follow their lead. A look, a shared moment, a back-and-forth exchange. Research shows that these small interactions build the brain's ability to regulate itself. They strengthen the systems responsible for attention, emotion, and social engagement. And the key is, it doesn't require more time. It requires more presence. Even a few minutes, spread across the day, can change how a child feels internally. The second thing that helps is predictability. A brain that struggles with regulation benefits from knowing what comes next. This doesn't mean a strict schedule. It means a rhythm. Simple, repeatable patterns in the day. Morning routine, meal times, bedtime sequence, and especially preparing transitions, letting your child know what's about to happen next. In 5 minutes, we're going to leave. After this, it's time for dinner. This gives the brain time to adjust, and that alone can prevent many difficult moments. The third piece is movement. Young children are not designed to sit still for long periods, but for children with regulation challenges, movement becomes even more important. It helps release built-up stress. It supports attention. It stabilizes the nervous system. This doesn't have to be structured. Running, climbing, jumping, dancing in the living room. The goal is simple. Let the body do what it needs to do so the brain can settle afterward. The fourth thing is often overlooked. Sleep. Sleep is not just rest. It's when the brain resets its ability to regulate attention and emotion. Children who struggle with regulation often also struggle with sleep, and that creates a cycle. Less sleep leads to less regulation, leads to more stress, leads to worse sleep. So even small improvements in sleep can have a big impact. Consistent bedtime, a simple routine, reducing stimulation before sleep. These are small changes, but they directly support the brain. If you can only focus on one thing at first, make it sleep. It is the foundation. A well-rested brain is a more flexible, resilient, and regulated brain. Everything else, the patience for connection, the ability to handle transitions becomes exponentially easier with adequate sleep. The fifth piece is reducing overload. Some children experience the world as more intense, more noise, more input, more stimulation. And when the brain receives too much at once, it becomes harder to regulate anything else. So one of the most helpful things you can do is simplify the environment. Fewer distractions, clearer spaces, less background noise. And also, pay attention to when your child seems overwhelmed. Because many behavioral reactions are actually signs of overload. There's one more piece that quietly influences everything we've talked about, and that is co-regulation. Young children don't regulate themselves alone. They learn regulation through you, through your voice, your presence, your reactions. When a child is overwhelmed, their brain is not in a state where it can calm itself easily. So what it looks for is something external that feels stable. That's where you come in, not by controlling the situation, but by becoming a steady point inside it. This can be very simple. Lowering your voice instead of raising it. Slowing your movements. Staying physically close without forcing interaction. Sometimes even just sitting down and saying, "I'm here." What this does is signal safety to the nervous system. And safety is what allows regulation to begin. Over time, something important happens. The child starts to internalize that process. What was once external becomes something they can do on their own. But that takes time. And it starts with co-regulation, not independence. By staying calm, you are literally lending them your calm. Your regulated nervous system helps their dysregulated one find its way back to baseline. It's the most powerful tool you have. There's also something important to understand about progress. It's not always visible right away. You might create more structure, improve sleep, be more present, and still have difficult moments. That doesn't mean it's not working, because what's changing first is not always behavior. It's the underlying system. The brain is slowly learning how to shift, how to pause, how to recover. And those changes happen gradually, almost invisibly at first, until one day you notice transitions are slightly easier. Recovery is slightly faster. The intensity is slightly lower. That's how real progress looks. Not sudden change, but small shifts that build over time. Another important shift is this. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this behavior?" ask, "What is this behavior telling me?" Is the child tired, overstimulated, struggling with a transition, seeking connection? When you start looking at behavior as communication, your response changes completely. And that's where real progress begins. Let's bring this into a simple example. A child has a meltdown in the evening. You could see this as bad behavior. Or you could step back and ask, what happened before this? Maybe they had a long day. They didn't move enough. They were overstimulated. They're tired. Now the behavior makes sense. And when it makes sense, you can respond differently. You might realize the solution isn't a consequence, but a change in the routine. A 10-minute dance party after school to get the wiggles out. A quieter afternoon. Or moving dinner 30 minutes earlier. You're solving the root cause, not just managing the symptom. Another powerful tool is doing less, but more consistently. Many parents try to change everything at once. Better sleep, more structure, more connection, more activities, and it becomes overwhelming. Instead, choose one or two things. For example, a consistent bedtime and 5 minutes of real connection each day. Do that for a week. Then add something else. Small changes, done consistently, are what actually reshape patterns over time. 5 minutes of focused play today might not feel like much, but 35 minutes over a week and 150 minutes over a month fundamentally strengthens your connection and their sense of security. And here's something that often brings relief. You don't need to get this perfect. There will still be difficult days. There will still be moments where things feel overwhelming. That's part of development. What matters is not perfection. It's direction. You are gradually helping your child's brain build the ability to regulate itself. Progress is not a straight line. It's more like a spiral. You might feel like you're revisiting the same challenge, but each time you and your child are approaching it with a slightly stronger foundation. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. You don't need a diagnosis to start helping your child. You don't need to wait. You can support their brain today through connection, predictability, movement, sleep, and reducing overload. These are simple things, but together, they are incredibly powerful. In the next video, we'll look at 5 early signs experts actually take seriously and most parents miss. And the truth is this: most behaviors mean nothing on their own, but some patterns actually do. And if this video gave you something useful, you can share it with someone who might need exactly this kind of clarity right now. One day, your child seems completely fine. The next day, something feels different. And you start wondering, is this normal? Or am I missing something important? Because here's the truth. Most behaviors mean nothing on their own, but some patterns actually do. And once you see them, you won't look at your child's behavior the same way again. Research actually shows that parental intuition is statistically significant. When a parent feels something is different about their child's development, they are often right. But intuition needs context. That's what we are building today. In the last videos, we talked about early signs of ADHD and autism, and what actually helps children before any diagnosis. But that still leaves one big question: what actually matters? Because there are so many behaviors, so many moments that could mean something, or nothing at all, and that uncertainty can be exhausting. So today, we're going to simplify this, not by listing 20 different signs, but by focusing on the few patterns that experts consistently take seriously over time. Think of this as a filter, a way to separate what's part of normal development from what might need a closer look. Before we start, just one quick reminder. No single sign means anything on its own. What matters is how often it happens, how intense it is, and whether it stays consistent over time. That's what turns behavior into a pattern. And patterns are what matter. Development is messy. There will be outliers. But when multiple outliers cluster together, that is when we pay attention. Let's start with the first one: persistent sleep dysregulation. Many children go through phases where sleep is difficult. That's completely normal. But when sleep challenges are ongoing, hard to improve, and show up night after night, that becomes important. A child who struggles to fall asleep, wakes frequently, or seems tired, but still can't settle. And here's why this matters so much. A tired brain cannot regulate itself. Sleep is when the brain processes the emotional experiences of the day. It's essentially a reset button for the nervous system. If that reset doesn't happen fully, the brain starts the next day already running on deficit. So what you see during the day, the impulsivity, the emotional reactions, the difficulty focusing, often starts at night. This is not just a sleep issue. It's a regulation issue. The second pattern is delays in communication or movement. Now, every child develops differently, and variation is completely normal. But here's the key question: is development moving forward? Because even slow progress is still progress. But when development seems to stall, or important skills don't begin to emerge, that's when it becomes meaningful. This could look like limited use of gestures, very slow language development, or noticeable differences in coordination. Pay close attention to nonverbal communication. Is your child pointing to share interest? Are they responding to their name consistently? These often emerge before words and are powerful indicators of social engagement. It's not about comparing your child to others. It's about noticing change over time. The third pattern is extreme difficulty with emotional regulation. All children have big emotions, but in some children, those emotions don't just come and go. They take over. They build quickly. They feel intense, and they are very hard to come down from. You might notice frequent meltdowns, reactions that feel much bigger than the situation, or a child who struggles to calm down, even with support. Here is a specific metric: recovery time. A typical tantrum might last minutes. A dysregulated meltdown can last an hour or more, leaving the child exhausted afterward. It's not just the storm. It's how long it takes to clear the sky. And this is important. This is not about behavior. It's about capacity. The brain is struggling to regulate intensity. The fourth pattern is unusual responses to sensory input. Some children experience the world more intensely. Sounds feel louder. Lights feel brighter. Textures feel uncomfortable. Others seek more input. They move constantly, touch everything, or look for strong physical experiences. This might look like refusing to wear certain shoes because of a seam, covering ears at vacuum cleaners, or crashing into furniture intentionally. It's not defiance, it's physiology. And from the outside, this can seem unrelated. But underneath, it's the same system. The nervous system trying to find balance. What matters is not the behavior itself, but how strong, how frequent, and how persistent it is. Because sensory processing influences how a child experiences everything else. The fifth and most important pattern is consistency across situations. A behavior in one situation is usually not a concern. A child might struggle in a loud environment, but be calm at home. That makes sense. But when the same patterns appear across different situations, at home, outside, with different people, and continue over time, that's when it becomes meaningful. Experts look for this specifically because it rules out temporary stressors. If a child is struggling everywhere, it suggests an internal neurological difference rather than an external environmental cause. Because now, we're not looking at a situation, we're looking at a pattern. And here's something many parents miss. Sometimes, these patterns are not extreme. They are subtle. A child who is slightly more intense, slightly more sensitive, slightly harder to settle. But it's always there, in the background. And over time, those small differences start to add up. That's why patterns matter more than moments. Now let's bring this together. Imagine a child who struggles with sleep over a long period, has very intense emotional reactions, shows sensory sensitivities, and these patterns appear consistently in daily life. Each of these alone might not mean much, but together they form a pattern. This cluster is what clinicians call a clinical picture. It's the combination of factors that guides understanding and support. And here's the most important part. This is not about worrying, it's about clarity. Because when you know what actually matters, you stop second-guessing every small behavior. And instead, you start observing with purpose. Knowledge reduces anxiety. When you can name what you are seeing, it becomes less scary. It becomes something you can work with, rather than something you fear. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. It's not the behavior itself, it's the pattern behind it. How often? How intense? How consistent? That's what turns everyday challenges into meaningful signals. In the next video, we're going to talk about something that brings relief to many parents. What actually causes ADHD and autism, and why it has nothing to do with bad parenting. There are so many myths out there that make parents feel guilty. We're going to clear those up with science, because once you understand that, something important shifts. And if this video gave you clarity, you can share it with someone who might need exactly that right now. Let's start with something many parents feel. but almost never say out loud. What did I do wrong? Was it something I missed? Something I should have done differently? Something I didn't notice early enough? Or maybe something I did, without realizing the impact. Because when your child struggles, your mind naturally goes there. You replay moments. You question decisions. You look for a reason. And very often, you land on yourself. So before we go any further, let's make one thing very clear. ADHD and autism are not caused by bad parenting, not by being too strict, not by being too permissive, not by giving too much screen time, not by sugar, not by a single choice you made. And hearing that might feel reassuring for a moment. But real relief doesn't come from just hearing it. It comes from understanding why it's true. ADHD and autism are what we call neurodevelopmental conditions, which means they are rooted in how the brain develops, very early in life, long before behavior becomes visible, long before a child is expected to sit still, to focus, or to regulate emotions. And most importantly, long before parenting style has the kind of influence many people assume. Research shows that genetics play a very strong role, not in a simple, one-gene way, but in complex patterns that influence how the brain is wired. Things like how easily attention can be directed, how quickly impulses arise, how strongly emotions are felt, how sensory information is processed. These are not learned behaviors. They are part of how the brain is built. And this development begins early, often before birth. During pregnancy, the brain is forming connections at an incredible speed. Millions of neural connections are being created and organized. This process follows a general pattern, but it is also influenced by genetics, which means, from the very beginning, each brain develops in a slightly different way. And here's an important shift in perspective. Different does not mean damaged. Different means the brain processes the world in its own way. Now, genetics are a big part of the picture, but they're not the whole story. There are also early developmental processes that shape how the brain functions. For example, how different brain regions communicate with each other, how efficiently signals are transmitted, how the nervous system responds to stimulation. These are biological systems, not something a parent controls. And this is where many misunderstandings come from, because what parents see is behavior. A child who doesn't listen, a child who reacts strongly, a child who struggles with focus or transitions. And behavior feels like something that should be shaped, corrected, or guided. But underneath that behavior is a system that is still developing, and in some cases, developing differently. So, instead of asking, what caused this? A more helpful question becomes, how does this brain work? Because once you ask that question, everything starts to shift. There's something else. That often creates confusion. Many parents feel like, this wasn't there before, or this suddenly got worse. But in reality, the underlying differences were often there all along. They just weren't as visible yet. In early childhood, demands are relatively low. A child can move freely, take breaks, follow their interests, but as they grow, the expectations increase. Sit still, pay attention, wait your turn, manage frustration, handle transitions smoothly. And this is where the gap becomes visible. Not because something new appeared, but because the environment started asking more from the system. This is why many parents notice changes during specific phases: starting daycare, entering preschool, beginning school. These are moments where demands increase. And that's often when differences become more noticeable, and it's also why early support matters so much. Not to fix the child, but to adjust the environment in a way that supports how the brain works. Because when there is a mismatch, everything feels harder, more frustration, more overwhelm, more conflict. But when there is alignment, things begin to stabilize. Now, there's one more important piece that brings many parents a sense of relief. No two children are exactly the same. Even with the same diagnosis, the experience can look very different. One child may struggle more with attention, another with emotional regulation, another with sensory sensitivity, because every brain is unique. And that means support is not one size fits all. This is why comparing your child to others often leads to more confusion than clarity. Because you're not looking for a perfect match. You're trying to understand your child's specific pattern. And once you begin to understand that pattern, something important happens. You stop seeing behavior as a problem to fix and start seeing it as information. Information about what the brain needs. A meltdown becomes a signal, not of bad behavior, but of overwhelm. Inattention becomes a signal, not of laziness, but of difficulty directing focus. Restlessness becomes a signal, not of disobedience, but of a nervous system that is seeking regulation. And when you see those signals clearly, your response changes. You become less reactive, more intentional, more focused on support instead of control. And that's where real change begins. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this: you did not cause this. And more importantly, you are not powerless. Because while you didn't create the pattern, you can absolutely support it. And that support does not require perfection. It doesn't require having all the answers. It starts with something much simpler: understanding how your child's brain works, and responding in a way that matches it. In the next video, we're going to look at something very practical: the mistakes that often make these challenges worse, without parents even realizing it. Because small changes in how we respond can reduce stress, reduce conflict, and make everyday life a lot easier for both you and your child. And if this video helped you, let go of even a small part of that self-doubt. You can share it with someone who might need exactly that reminder today. Let's start with something important. Most parents are not doing the wrong things because they don't care. They're doing them because they're trying to help. They're trying to create structure. They're trying to set boundaries. They're trying to teach their child how to behave. And yet, sometimes, despite all of that effort, things seem to get harder. More meltdowns, more resistance, more frustration on both sides. And that can feel incredibly confusing. Because it makes you wonder, why isn't this working? So today, we're going to look at 5 common mistakes. Not to blame, but to understand. Because once you see them, you can adjust them. And small adjustments can make a very big difference. But first, something worth saying clearly. These are not mistakes that come from bad parenting. They come from not yet having the right framework. Once you have it, everything starts to make more sense. Mistake number 1. Expecting self-regulation too early. This is one of the most common patterns. A child gets overwhelmed, reacts strongly, or can't calm down, and the expectation is they should be able to handle this. But here's the problem. Self-regulation is not something children just have. It's something they develop over time. And children with ADHD traits often develop these skills more slowly. This is not a choice. It's not defiance. It reflects how the brain's regulatory systems are maturing. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for pausing, planning, and managing impulses, develops well into early adulthood. In children with ADHD traits, this development often runs even further behind their peers. So when we expect independence too early, we create frustration for the child, who feels overwhelmed, and for the parent, who feels like nothing is working. The shift is simple but powerful. From "you should calm down" to "let me help you calm down." That's where regulation begins. Mistake number 2, inconsistent routines. Structure helps every child, but for children with regulation challenges, it's essential. And not just structure, predictability. When routines change constantly or expectations are unclear, the brain has to work much harder to keep up. And that leads to more resistance, more emotional reactions, more difficulty with transitions. It's not about being strict. It's about being predictable. Think of routine as scaffolding. It doesn't limit the child. It supports them. When a child knows what comes next, their nervous system can relax. When they don't know, it stays on alert. Simple rhythms in the day, morning, meals, bedtime, create a sense of stability. And stability reduces stress. Mistake number 3, overstimulating the environment. This one is easy to miss. Because modern environments are naturally stimulating. Noise, screens, busy schedules, constant input. For some children, this is manageable. But for others, it quickly becomes overwhelming. And when the brain is overloaded, it can't regulate properly. So what looks like bad behavior is often the result of too much input. Too many sounds, too many transitions, too many demands. A useful way to think about it. Every child has a sensory threshold, a point at which the nervous system becomes overloaded. In some children, that threshold is simply lower. And once it's crossed, no amount of correction will help. The system is already full. The solution is not removing everything, but simplifying where possible. Less background noise, more calm spaces, more moments without input, because regulation requires space. Mistake number 4, using punishment for dysregulation. This is one of the most important ones. When a child reacts strongly, it's easy to see it as behavior that needs correction. And the instinct is, set a consequence, teach a lesson, create discipline. But here's the problem. When a child is dysregulated, they are not in a state where they can learn. Their brain is overwhelmed. In this state, the thinking part of the brain is essentially offline. The child is not being defiant. They are flooded. And adding punishment does not teach regulation. It increases stress, which often leads to more of the same behavior. This doesn't mean no boundaries. It means understanding timing. Regulation first. Teaching second. Once the child is calm, that's the moment for connection, reflection, and learning. Not before. Mistake number 5. Focusing only on behavior, not the cause. This is where everything comes together. A child refuses to listen, has a meltdown, can't sit still, and the focus becomes, how do I stop this? But behavior is only the surface. Underneath, there's always something driving it. Fatigue, overstimulation, frustration, unmet needs. When we only address the behavior, we miss the root. And when we miss the root, the behavior keeps coming back. It's a bit like turning off a fire alarm without checking whether there's actually a fire. The noise stops, but the problem remains. The shift is this: from "how do I stop this" to "what is this telling me?" And that question changes everything. Now here's something important. Most of these mistakes don't look like mistakes. They look like normal parenting, setting expectations, keeping busy, trying to teach right from wrong. And that's why they're so common. Let's bring this into a simple example. A child has a meltdown in the afternoon. The reaction might be, they need discipline. They need to learn. But if you step back, you might see something different. They didn't sleep well. They had a busy day. They had no time to reset. They're overwhelmed. Now, the behavior makes sense. And when it makes sense, you respond differently. Maybe the solution isn't a consequence. Maybe it's a quieter afternoon, or a 10-minute movement break after school, or dinner 30 minutes earlier. You're not just managing the symptom. You're addressing the cause. And here's the most important part. You don't need to change everything. In fact, trying to fix everything at once usually makes things harder. Instead, start small. Choose one pattern, one adjustment, and apply it consistently. Because small changes, repeated over time, are what actually shift behavior. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. Most challenges are not caused by doing the wrong things. They come from doing the right things, but at the wrong time or in the wrong way for that child's brain. And once you understand that, something shifts. You stop fighting the behavior and start supporting the system behind it. In the next video, we're going to look at the other side of this. What actually helps? Simple, practical things that support attention, emotion, and regulation, even before any diagnosis. And if this video helped you see things differently, you can share it with someone who might be stuck in the same cycle right now. By now, we've talked about early signs, differences, patterns, and even what can make things harder. But that still leaves one very important question. What actually helps? Not in theory, not someday, but right now, in everyday life. Because when your child is struggling, you don't just want to understand it. You want to do something that actually makes a difference. And here's the good news. You don't need to wait for a diagnosis to start helping your child. In fact, some of the most effective support starts much earlier, in small, everyday moments. Before we get into specific strategies, there's one important shift. You're not trying to control behavior. You're supporting regulation. Because when regulation improves, behavior follows. Let's start with the first, and most important, connection. Not just being physically present, but being mentally and emotionally available. Moments where your attention is fully there, where you follow your child's lead instead of directing everything. It can be very simple. Sitting together, playing for a few minutes, sharing a small moment, a look, a smile, a back-and-forth exchange. And here's why this matters. These moments are not just nice to have. They are building the brain's ability to regulate itself. Because regulation develops through relationship. When a child feels connected, their nervous system feels safer. And a regulated nervous system can handle more. The second is predictability. A brain that struggles with regulation benefits from knowing what comes next. Not rigid schedules, but consistent patterns. A rhythm to the day. Morning routine, meal times, bedtime, and especially preparing transitions. Letting your child know what's about to happen next. In 5 minutes, we're leaving. After this, it's time for dinner. This gives the brain time to adjust. And that reduces resistance before it even starts. Because most difficult moments don't come out of nowhere. They come from sudden change. The third is movement. Movement is not just activity. It's regulation. It helps release built-up stress, supports attention, stabilizes the nervous system. And for some children, it's essential. Without enough movement, their system becomes overloaded. And that shows up as restlessness, impulsivity, or emotional reactions. So the goal is simple. Build movement into the day. Not just once, but regularly. Running, climbing, jumping, dancing. It doesn't need to be structured. It just needs to happen. Because when the body moves, the brain can settle. The fourth is sleep. This is the foundation of everything else. attention, emotion, impulse control. All of it depends on sleep, and even small improvements can have a big impact. A consistent bedtime, a simple routine, reducing stimulation before sleep, lower lights, less noise, fewer screens. Because sleep is not just about rest, it's about resetting the brain. The fifth is reducing overload. Some children experience the world as more intense, more noise, more input, more stimulation. And when the brain is overloaded, regulation becomes much harder. So, one of the most powerful things you can do is simplify the environment. Less background noise, fewer distractions, clearer spaces, but also pay attention to timing. When does your child seem overwhelmed? After a busy day? In loud environments? During transitions? Because many behaviors are not random. They are signals of overload. Now let's add something that connects all of this. Co-regulation. Young children don't regulate themselves alone. They learn it through you, through your voice, your presence, your reactions. When your child is overwhelmed, your calm becomes their reference point. Not by controlling them, but by being steady. Lower your voice. Slow your movements. Stay close. Sometimes, even just saying, "I'm here," and that's enough. Because what the brain needs in that moment is not instruction. It's safety. And over time, something important happens. What starts as co-regulation becomes self-regulation. But that process takes time and repetition. Now here's something that often gets overlooked. It's not just about what you do in the moment. It's about what you build throughout the day. Because regulation is not a switch. It's a capacity. And that capacity is either supported or drained, moment by moment. You can think of it like this. Every time your child sleeps well, connects with you, moves their body, and experiences predictability, you are adding to their capacity. And every time they are overtired, overstimulated, or constantly pushed to adapt, that capacity gets used up. So by the end of the day, what looks like sudden behavior is often the result of an already exhausted system. This is why some days feel easier than others. Not because the child is different, but because the system is. Let's bring this into a real-life example. A child struggles every evening. Meltdowns, resistance. Everything feels harder. At first, it looks like behavior. But if you step back, you might see something else. The day was long. There was a lot of stimulation. Not enough movement. Sleep was already low. Now the system is overloaded. So instead of reacting to the behavior, you start adjusting the day. More movement earlier. Less stimulation in the evening. A consistent bedtime. More connection before transitions. And slowly, things begin to shift. Not instantly, but gradually. And here's a common trap many parents fall into. Trying something once and expecting it to work immediately. But regulation doesn't work like that. It's not a quick fix. It's a process. A system that builds over time. So what matters is not doing everything perfectly, but doing small things consistently. That's how real progress looks. Not sudden change, but small improvements that build over time. A slightly easier transition. A slightly faster recovery. A slightly calmer evening. And those small shifts add up. And here's something important to remember. You don't have to do all of this perfectly. There will still be difficult days. There will still be moments that feel overwhelming. That's part of development. What matters is not perfection. It's direction. So if you take one thing from this video, let it be this. You don't need to wait to start helping your child. Support begins with simple things. Connection, predictability, movement, sleep, reducing overload. These are not complicated, but together they are powerful because they support the system behind the behavior. And most importantly, they meet your child where they are. If this video gave you something practical, you can share it with someone who might need exactly this right now. In video 1 to 6 of our first series, we looked at something many parents struggle with in real time. What to do in the middle of a meltdown when everything feels out of control. Because that's where small shifts can make the biggest difference. Find the first of those 6 videos in the link.